Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Let's go to California today, okay? I take every chance I can to go back to my old stomping grounds because I still feel, I feel California's home in a way that I have absolutely no right to feel because I've lived here in Toronto for 40, 50, closer to 50 years. And I haven't been to California 10, 15 years. It feels like home. So I'm going to talk to somebody there who also feels like home in the sense that we should know each other and we don't. So, because we're in the same network. And that's Stephen Zunis, who's a professor at the University of San Francisco, and he lives in Santa Cruz. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hello.
Great to finally meet you.
Yes, this is lovely. I was looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, we have exchanged emails, and you actually wrote stuff for us, I think, for Peace Magazine like 15 years ago or more. Something about the Western Sahara. I know what happened. I published something, or I sent something to you, as I recall, for you to look it over and see somebody who wanted to publish something about the Western Sahara. And you said, if you publish this, I'll never speak to you again.
well, that's basically, I don't think of it that strongly, but I did indicate that, there's this outfit called the High Atlas Foundation, which is funded by the Moroccan royal family's mining company, that's illegally exploiting the phosphates and other natural resources in the occupied Western Sahara. And they have this whole network of folks who write articles, often push towards sort of peace and kind of liberal-oriented journals about how benign and wonderful the king is at reconciliation, at providing autonomy for various areas and this kind of thing. But of course, autonomy in the case of Western Sahara is the denial of independence, denial of the right of self-determination, making permanent this legal occupation for what the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and others see as a non-self-governing territory under foreign belligerent occupation. And Freedom House, which has this quantitative ranking on political freedom and et cetera, sees a Moroccan occupation in Western Sahara as literally the worst in the world, save only for Syria. And so, the idea that granting so-called autonomy under these kind of circumstances, where even the littlest bit of dissent is met with severe repression, was. It's problematic to say the least. But the Moroccans do have a real well-oiled propaganda machine. It kind of takes advantage of, a lot of us here in North America, have good feelings on Morocco. It's a beautiful country. I mean, the architecture, the cuisine, it's welcoming, hospitable to Western tourists and things like that. But, the situation, it is an autocratic state, and the situation for people under the Moroccan occupation in Western Sahara is indeed quite severe.
We've had a couple of articles, but it's the whole issue is a bit obscure. Maybe you can give us a little history of what's this all about. We don't really hear very much about it here.
No, not at all. I mean, it's comparable to the situation in East Timor. That you may remember how on the verge of the decolonization, the powerful neighbor ended up invading and engaging in severe repression. But because the invader had friends in the Security Council, UN Security Council, they blocked the UN from enforcing its resolutions calling for withdrawal of foreign troops and allowing for self-determination. The International Court of Justice weighed in favor of self-determination. The African Union, of course, pushed the idea of self-determination. The Organization of African Unity's charter, is very clear. You cannot change colonial, boundaries by force. The Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which is the official name for Western Sahara, is a full member state of the African Union. But Morocco did end up annexing most of the territory in defiance of the international community. But similarly with the U.S. policy regarding Israel and its occupation, that they took the position that it's up to the negotiation between the two parties, while giving massive amounts of military aid and other assistance to the occupier, and blocking the UN from enforcing any of its resolutions.
Hold on now. Let me get clear about how this works. Are the Moroccan government people or army or whatever actually in the Western Sahara?
Yes. They currently occupy about 80% of the country, including most of its cities and natural resources. About a third of the population has fled into refugee camps in Western Algeria to escape the repression. Where the Algerians have essentially allowed the Polisario Front, the National Liberation Movement, which is the ruling party of Western Sahara, to govern the area, as well as the small strip of liberated zones in the western part of the country. But the Sahrawis are, like the Moroccans, are of mixed Arab and Berber ancestry, and and our Sunni Muslim, Arab Sunni Muslim people. Ethnically, they are distinct. They have their own distinct dialect, kinship system, food, dress, history. They've never been part of Morocco, despite Moroccan claims to the contrary. Also, interestingly enough, they practice a rather liberal interpretation of Islam, though devout. They for example, give women the full rights to inheritance and divorce. They keep their maiden names. They're actually in leadership positions in the self-governance. The Moroccan occupation forces have singled out women activists for being uppity, to torture and sexual abuse in prison. The exact boundaries, or like most boundaries in that part of the world, are somewhat arbitrary. The Sahrawis are indeed a distinct people, and by almost any measure, the vast majority would choose independence if given the opportunity.
Now they are the great majority in their particular region.
Well, they were until Morocco started bringing in settlers. And, just like the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, it's illegal to transfer your civilian population onto occupied territories. But at this point, they outnumber the indigenous population by more than 3 to 1. Now, these are not usually ideological settlers like you find in many cases on the West Bank. These are basically, they're attracted by tax breaks, subsidized housing, and quite a few other perks that the Moroccans provide. This is a captive nation by any measure. And they've been the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, has been recognized by over 70 countries, and as I mentioned, they are a full member state of the African Union. Now, things shifted in December of 2020 in Trump's final weeks in office, where the United States became the first country in the world to formally recognize Morocco's annexation of the territory.
Oh.
And so that's why on most world maps, and whether it be Rand McNally, National Geographic, Google, whatever, you do see separate countries, or at least hash marks or something, noting its special status. And all U.S. government maps, it's just one country. And despite bipartisan pressure and pressure from foreign governments, and obviously from people concerned with international law, the Biden administration has refused to reverse Trump's decision, which of course raises questions around double standards and hypocrisy, when the U.S. quite correctly condemns Russian aggression in Ukraine and its attempted annexation illegally of Ukrainian territory, while the United States takes this position that the conquest of occupied territories is okay if you're a U.S. ally like Morocco.
Is there any way to bring that to the World Court?
Well, it's been to the World Court. When Moroccans and the Mauritanians both had this irredentist designs on Western Sahara. They took their case to the excuse me, to the International Court of Justice in the fall of 1975, just weeks before Spain was going to finally relinquish the colony, which is then called Spanish Sahara. And the World Court ruled unanimously that while Morocco was correct that there were some tribal leaders during the 19th century that had pledged fealty to the Moroccan Sultan, and though there were some ethnic similarities between the tribes of Western Sahara and those in northern Mauritania, neither country, did not constitute sovereignty. That as a non-self-governing territory, that is a colony, the people of the territory had the right to decide themselves. And this is the issue, really, that if the Sahrawis voted and decided they wanted to be part of Morocco as part of an autonomy agreement or anything else, that'd certainly be their right. But they have to have the option of independence. They have to be by the self-determination, by definition, requires that independence be an option. And the Moroccans, with U.S. support, have basically said no, they don't. We don't think the people there should have the right of self-determination.
How many cases are there like that in the world, in which there are disputes about who gets to dominate whom? I've never really looked at the question of whether the U.S. has a bad overall record of supporting the wrong side, of course, I shouldn't even have a totally fixed opinion about what is the wrong side, but clearly, there ought to be a procedure.
Certainly. I mean, in certain ways, there certainly nations, in my view, have a moral right to self-determination, like Tibet, or Chechnya, or Kurdistan, or West Papua, or I can think of quite a few. But in terms of international law, in terms of what the United Nations recognizes, in terms of what the international community recognizes, there've only been a handful of cases in recent years. East Timor, which finally, belatedly, after 25 years of Indonesian occupation, the slaughter about a third of the population, finally received its independence in 2002. Namibia, of course, was another case when apartheid South Africa held on to that trust territory, long after the mandate had been revoked by the Security Council. But currently, the Israeli occupation and the Moroccan occupation are the only cases where you have an entire nation, Western Sahara and Palestine, that is effectively under the control of an invading army. Of course, in terms of the U.S. perspective, obviously we've stood up against such aggression as we're doing now in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we stood up obviously against the Iraqis when they invaded Kuwait in 1990. We can obviously debate whether going to war was the best response to that, but there's no question that the U.S. was right to say no, you can't go and invade Kuwait like that. But when they're allies, like Indonesia and like Indonesia or like Morocco or like Israel, the U.S. is definitely willing to give international law a backseat.
Well, that's something that's been on my mind a lot. I think we're going to have a new world order, because this war in Ukraine has been unusual in that it's really upset the whole system. Not that there was much of a system going. We had rickety old institutions that weren't working, but I don't think it's gone now. Basically, we can't count on anything. We got to start over. And I think it's high time for us to think seriously in terms of developing systems for deciding questions of this kind in some kind of authoritative way. I mean, we need to have a United Nations that can.
In certain ways that we do have the system, in the sense that we do have the World Court, we do have the United Nations Charter. The issue is that you have the permanent
there's no enforcement.
no enforcement mechanisms, because the permanent members can block the enforcement of international law. But when you think about, I mean, you look at East Timor, for example. I mean, 25 years ago, that was considered a hopeless cause. That was considered, the ultimate triumph of realpolitik. That here is a clear-cut act of aggression, and yet, the support by the United States and made it impossible for the Security Council to enforce its resolutions. In fact, I know Patrick Moynihan, our U.S. ambassador to United Nations, bragged in reference to both East Timor and Western Sahara, which the invasions took place actually within 6 weeks of each other in late 1975, that the task given to me by the State Department was to make the United Nations as ineffective as possible in dealing with these matters. I took upon this assignment with no inconsiderable success. Those are his words, and
I hope he was smiling.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope he was smiling and shaking his head and rolling his eyes.
Yeah. It's quite. Quite brazen, actually. But East Timor is now free, and why? Because global civil society mobilized, effectively shaming the American, the Canadian, the Australian, and the British governments to end their support for Indonesia. And so when the Southeast Asian economy tanked in the big financial crisis in 1998, basically these countries said to Indonesia, "Hey, we'd like to help you out, but this East Timor thing is making it politically impossible for us." So the pressure went on. The Indonesians allowed for a referendum, and East Timor is now free. And so really the only hope I see for Western Sahara is for similar global mobilization. I mean, that's also, frankly, what ended Western support for apartheid South Africa, both its occupation in Namibia, but also the apartheid system itself, when finally global civil society pressured the Western nations to finally have targeted sanctions on South Africa, and in the corporate support for the apartheid system. So
but look, I mean, that's no way to enforce law.
No, I know we shouldn't have to resort to that, right. Maybe the only real hope we have, unfortunately, realistically, until we have an international legal system that actually has some teeth to it.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, in terms of exactly. Maybe we're thinking along different lines, because I don't disagree with you. Of course, that sounds like the only thing we might have any hope of being able to accomplish now, but always those take years and a lot of bloodshed before it's all over.
Oh yes. It is such a tragedy, because if we can't get something as basic, as the country shouldn't invade and gobble up their neighbors. I mean, we can't get something as basic as that right. How are we going to deal with more complex global issues? Well,
here's what I've been thinking. That I haven't had a chance to try this out on many people yet, so maybe you're going to say I'm not very, very realistic. But I think we do not want to have a world police force. I don't, because I think that's really bad. But you need some way of enforcing the law. Now, I don't know what the World Court did about Western Sahara, but I do know what the World Court did early on about the invasion of Ukraine, when basically they said, well, it's going to take us time to sort this out, but in the meantime, you get out, you stop doing this, halt, and go home, or stop it. Of course, it had absolutely no effect whatever on Putin. But what and look how many people have been killed in the meantime since then. We need something that can stop him while he's in it, instead of wait 10 years and then bring him
Yeah,
to justice if
no,
you can catch him.
no question, no question about that. And
So what I
what's
was
also sad
thinking,
about Western Sahara is that I mean, the Polisario, the National Liberation Front, have essentially been doing everything right. They have never engaged in terrorism,
mhm,
not once. You know, they have pushed things at the negotiating table. Their degree of self-governance in the refugee camps and liberated zones is remarkably democratic. You know, they've allowed, you know, leadership, a strong leadership for women. In the occupied territories, you have Aminatu Haidar. She's been called a Saharan Gandhi, you know, for leading the nonviolent resistance campaigns, despite being disappeared for quite a few years and being subjected to horrendous torture and other maltreatment.
who is this person again? I don't know.
Aminatu Haidar. She's won the Right Livelihood Award. She's won the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. She's won the Russell Train Foundation Civic Courage Award. She's been nominated multiple times for the Nobel Peace Prize. Remarkable woman who has you know, led the nonviolent resistance in the occupied Western Sahara.
Okay, spell her name and I'll look it up and put her picture on this screen before,
Sure.
you know, as I edit it.
Aminatu as Aminatou. Aminatu, and her last name is Haidar, Haidar. She is quite remarkable, and yeah, the Polisario actually, after 15 years of armed struggle, agreed for a ceasefire in return for Morocco having a referendum, but for you know, for nearly 30 years. The Moroccans refused to do so. They tried to stack the voter rolls of Moroccan settlers and all. And meanwhile, the United States and France blocked the UN from enforcing its referenda, you know, calling for this resolution calling for a referendum. And so the Polisario did end up resuming the armed struggle a little under 2 years ago. But again, you know, they have, you know, focused solely on military targets. But, you know, there's no real hope that they can defeat Morocco militarily, especially in this era of drone warfare and open desert. You know, it's you know, the nonviolent movement, while it's done some impressive things, including a giant tent city with tens of thousands of people that was brutally broken up in the fall of 2010. I mean, in many ways, it was there, not Tunisia, where the first big Arab Spring really began because of the massive, similarly massive nonviolent protest. It's hard, you know, as great as nonviolent action is, and I'm a big proponent of it and its power to bring down even the most brutal dictatorships. When you're outnumbered in your country 3-1, you know, by colonists, you know, you need the majority for these struggles really to win. So, you know, with the armed struggle not being able to do it, the nonviolent struggle not being able to do it, and of course the diplomatic efforts stand still, you know, because of U.S. and French support. For Morocco, again, and really the only hope we have is, as I mentioned earlier, that you know, getting global civil society to mobilize. But you know, it's strangely off the radar of even very educated, committed people like you, you know, that are familiar with world affairs, who are sympathetic to human rights, international law, and if someone like you has, you know, barely heard of the place, you know, you can imagine, you know, where it is in terms of mobilizing public opinion, and you know, part of it, I think, frankly, is our, you know, we in the West have certain racist stereotypes of Arabs and Muslims. You know, the idea that you can have an Arab Muslim National Liberation Front, you know, that has been primarily nonviolent, that has women in leadership, you know, that is democratic in structure. It just doesn't fit into the Western paradigm of what that part of the world is like.
Tell me what hope there is of getting opposition within the Moroccan society.
Well, Morocco, I mean, inside Morocco itself, they have liberalized, you know, somewhat in recent years. But, you know, the three things you absolutely cannot talk about, obviously, you can't criticize Islam. You can't criticize the royal family or question their finances or anything like that. And the third thing is you don't question the national unity of the country. That is to question the Moroccan occupation. And those who do are severely repressed. But we're starting to see some questioning, as there is a growing pro-democracy, anti-corruption movement among particularly younger Moroccans. They are, some of them are starting to question the occupation as well, especially since you have a number of Sahrawi students and Moroccan universities who are working with the pro-democracy Moroccans, similar to what the East Timorese students actually did in Indonesia during that time. Also, of course, thanks to the internet, more and more Moroccans are getting other perspectives than in the state-controlled media. And generally the disillusionment about the corruption, the inequality, the lack of real democracy in Morocco itself is enabling just the beginnings of some cracks in the facade. Though at this point, unfortunately, I think the vast majority of Moroccans, even those who consider themselves liberal reformers, have pretty much bought into the line of the Moroccan government, and the propaganda is extreme. I mean, they're insisting the Polisario is alternately an Algerian puppet, communist, allied with Al Qaeda, allied with ISIS, allied with Iran and Hezbollah. I mean, whoever the favorite enemy of the month is, and of course you have members of Congress who are quite willing to sign on to these dear colleague letters and stuff that repeating this kind of garbage. Because again, Morocco's seen as a strategic ally, and they've recognized Israel, and they are support U.S. in the war on terrorism and that. So, just like the U.S. is quite willing to support these horrific right-wing dictatorships in Latin America and elsewhere in the name of fighting communism, we're willing to support, Morocco and its repression because they are considered a strategic ally. Meanwhile, the French, who controlled, Morocco for quite a few, years during the colonial period, they have very tight business ties. And of course, Morocco is threatening if the Europeans cross them, they'll just open up the spigot for massive migration, because there's only 9 miles separating Morocco and Spain. And in fact, Spain has these two little presidios on the Moroccan coast, where the Moroccans, when Spain allowed the president of Western Sahara into the country for medical treatment, the Moroccans allowed thousands of these African migrants to sweep into the presidio of Melilla. And so, there's that fear that,
has the EU taken a position about the Western Sahara?
Well, officially, they call for self-determination and consistent with the UN Security Council resolutions and the like. But individual governments, again, feeling a lot of pressure on the migration issues and others are starting to support this idea of autonomy, without the right of independence.
Okay.
The Moroccan plan for autonomy is just pretty phony. It doesn't meet the international definition of autonomy. Though there would be a degree of supposed self-governance. The king would have the veto in all their measures, and given how repressive it is, I don't think anybody really takes this seriously. But the main problem with the proposal is it rules out the option of independence. And again, as a non-self-governing territory, they have that right to choose that option. But in terms of EU, what's interesting is that a number of countries, Spain, the EU itself, have signed free trade agreements and fisheries agreements and other things with the Moroccans. But the Moroccans insist they cannot distinguish between Morocco and the occupied Western Sahara. And each time they signed this agreement, it's gone to the European Court, and the European Court has ended up invalidating the agreement because it refuses to make that distinction. Mm-hmm. Because the European Court recognized it is a non-self-governing territory. They made similar rulings in regard to products from the West Bank, saying that you can't call them made in Israel, and because this is occupied territory, and consistent with that, they have said that no, you cannot fish off the coast of Western Sahara, in their territorial waters without permission of the Western Saharan government. This is not part of Morocco, and you can't pretend it is.
Okay. But now my sense is that the World Court has I haven't been following, obviously, this case, but the things that I've looked at in the past have been at questions of secession, when a piece of a country decides that they'd like to break off or divide in two. And the criteria are very ambiguous. And the rulings are basically something like, well, if the dominant group is abusive enough, then maybe we'll say, yes, you have a right to break off. But, we don't really want to take a position. And so it basically is, there is no international law that is clear enough to tell people beforehand whether or not, if they decide to secede, whether they will have any real legal grounds for their case. Well, and that's the problem. We need to have a much better set of rules and a much better method of enforcing those rules as they are violated, while they are being violated, rather than try to bring some guy to the ICC 15 years later.
Right. Well, yeah. The questions around secession are complex ones, legally and morally in some cases. But this is not a case of secession. Secession is defined as a country breaking away from within the internationally recognized borders of a nation state. Western Sahara, with the exception of the United States, is not recognized as a part of Morocco. It is Africa's last colony for all intents and purposes. It is a non-self-governing. It is a non-self-governing territory under foreign belligerent occupation, as the World Court, as the United Nations, others have made, as the UN Secretary General, and everybody has made clear. North American media often, calls the Polisario a secessionist movement, but again, that's not true. You cannot be secessionist if you were never part of the country in the first place. So
there was a moment at which they were actually invaded, the same as.
Yes, it was early November 1975. As the Spaniards were pulling out, they had promised a referendum, but this is when Franco was on his deathbed. And the United States is really freaked out about, having the leftists, gaining ascendancy like they tried to do in Portugal the year before, when that country had moved away from fascism. And so Henry Kissinger, basically pressured the reluctant Spain to renege on their promise of a referendum. The Moroccan forces, Spaniards pulled out and they allowed the Moroccan forces.
Okay.
The Moroccan forces.
That's where we need some kind of institutional development, I think, where at the moment when somebody is clearly invading illegally, you go to something like the World Court, as they did with the Ukraine, immediately after the invasion, and the World Court says stop it. Now, from my point of view, at that moment, anybody who violates that stop it rule and continues to do the invasion is a war criminal.
Exactly. In fact, the United Nations Security Council, passed 2 resolutions at the time of the Moroccan invasion, saying this is illegal. Moroccan troops have to withdraw. You have to have an act of self-determination. But thanks to French and American pressure, it was under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, not Chapter 7, which made it therefore denying the Security Council its enforcement mechanisms.
Okay, well, the enforcement mechanisms are very, very rarely used.
Yes,
and probably rightly so, because I don't want any, world police running around the world enforcing things. But I do think that what should happen is something like this. We should say, okay, you've got a war criminal at the head of a regime that is actually at this moment perpetrating a war crime. Yes. Therefore, anybody in your country who you put him in power. You elected or you ratified this king of yours or whatever, and he's your guy, and you're responsible. So the Moroccans, or in the case of Ukraine, it'd be the Russians, are responsible for getting rid of him. Now, somebody from your country, maybe from his entourage, should come to us with a plan for how you would like to arrest this guy and replace him with somebody who's going to obey the international law.
Yeah,
and we will be glad to hear your application, and
yes.
we will see whether or not we think you're a responsible group of people. And if we think so, we'll get the ratification from, say, the General Assembly and I don't know, 2 or 3 other outfits to make sure that we're not having a kangaroo court kind of thing. But we need to get some kind of authorization and ratification of a position that you need to be authorized to replace this guy, and then you go take him out and arrest him, and we will the rest of the world will recognize you as the new government. I think
the thing is, I mean, in case of
legitimate kind of way of proceeding, and we need to have a rule saying that this is a procedure now that should be followed.
The thing is, I mean, I certainly don't disagree with you on this, but we wouldn't even need to go that far. I mean, all would need to happen would be for France, the United States, to place the Western Sahara question under Chapter 7, and therefore put on economic sanctions. And that would be
economic sanctions don't necessarily do a thing. We've got
no. If you're a dependent country like Morocco, and you are not unable to get loans from the IMF anymore, you're unable to get military equipment to keep your generals happy. If your trade was reduced, I mean that would definitely be enough to give them a change of heart.
It's not working with Russia.
Russia's a lot bigger, a lot more powerful, a lot more self-sufficient than Morocco. Yeah. And so, but so really, I mean, the thing is the problem. I mean, the problem is not just the Moroccan monarchy. The problem is that the Moroccan monarchy is getting support from major powers. There's a French, there's a book in France came out called Notre Ami le Roi, our friend the king, and talked about all this corrupt, connection of the French government and business interest with the monarchy. A similar book could be written about the United States as well. And it's I mean, we are the enablers, and the West is the enablers of this. And
but I don't think that we're going to get over having different countries take different sides on issues. And I mean, this is always, it's just a question of who your friends are and how powerful your friends are. That's not the way to do things. We need something like a real legal international law that is predictable, so people can know what the law is and what will absolutely
definitely
going to happen to them if they violate the law. This is going to happen to you, even if the U.S. is your friend, no matter what happens.
Exactly. Yes, definitely.
That's what I think, and I think we need to have a real change in the institutions. But I don't know. Now, there's where the question is how you're going to get anybody to have the nerve to try to organize a whole new system.
And that's where global civil society comes in.
All right. Let's talk about that, because you said something early on that I think is interesting. Before we quite turned on the cameras, you said that you'd been very involved with the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. It's a wonderful organization, and you said that it was already scaling back before Peter Ackerman died, because he thought he'd done the job. That they have now put nonviolent strategic interaction as a major issue, a point of view that is discussed in mainstream international relations. Now, to me, that's very interesting. The claim that strategic nonviolence is now taken seriously.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. Well, I mean, as someone I mean, it used to be the study of nonviolence and nonviolent action was restricted to, ethics, philosophy, religion, those fields.
Mhm.
And, in the 70s and 80s, thanks to Gene Sharp and a couple others, some sociologists, started to take interest. But, it was still kind of on the fringes, especially in terms of political science, international relations, strategic studies, that kind of thing. I mean, but due to a number of things, I think the Serbian Revolution obviously got a lot of people interested. The Arab Spring, um, that has been a remarkable shift. I mean, I organized the very first panel of the American Political Science Association on strategic nonviolent action back in 1989. I similarly organized the very first panel of the International Studies Association on strategic nonviolent action. Now at these annual meetings, there are 6, 8, 10 panels on that topic, in
Really?
addition to papers and other panels. It's no longer just Gene Sharp, who did some really excellent work, but given that he grew, even though he insisted on this is not about pacifism, this is not looking at ethical stuff, I'm just looking at it as a strategic thing. The fact that Gene Sharp had himself come out of the pacifist tradition, his work with A.J. Mussey being a draft resistor, that kind of thing. People were a little suspect about that. But now you have this whole generation. Erica Chenoweth's probably the most prominent. But these very mainstream strategic studies people, looking at this. The International Studies Association now lists strategic nonviolent action as one of the recognized subfield of the discipline. The Erica Chenoweth's book, co-authored with Maria Stephan, also a very mainstream, political scientist, strategic analyst. Their book, How Civil Resistance Works, that came out a few years ago, actually won the top prize in both the ISA and the APSA. And now
It is, of all the books in the last 10 years that I think everybody in the world ought to read, I think it's probably number one.
Yeah, really, it's quite
Really
remarkable. I mean, my next shelf over on this side. I mean, when I started, teaching at the college level, 35 years ago, the number of serious studies of nonviolent action, could fill maybe half of a shelf. Now I have an entire bookcase on analysis, case studies, whatever of this phenomenon. It's been huge. It is that people are indeed taking this seriously. Now, obviously, people quibble about certain analyses and theoretical things like you would in any subdiscipline, in any social science discipline. But there's no question that it is now being taken seriously on in the academy for the first time.
Okay. Well, I've been retired for 22 or 5 years, something like that. But I even then I was teaching courses on nonviolence in my program, because I had a program at my college at the University of Toronto on peace and conflict studies. So one of the required courses was on nonviolence. But I didn't have a whole shelf full of books of other people who were working on that area. And I think the thing that in a way surprises me when you talk about how the discipline or the field of the study of nonviolent strategic interaction is growing is the fact that it's failing so often in practice. Mm-hmm. It's the bad guys are winning, and I guess Maria Stephan's, no, actually Erica Chenoweth's newer book has to do with the explanation of the fact that it's not doing as well as it had been when they wrote that book together. She with Maria Stephan. So it's kind of ironical, isn't it, that when the approach is not working as well as it had, that it only then becomes an interesting topic for research.
Well, actually, the interest, came up before the recent setbacks, and the recent setbacks are not, I think, that dramatic. I mean, a couple of things. One is that the and in the original Chenoweth Stefan research, they found that in looking at 350 or so movements that were going for broke. I mean, these are not reform movements for labor or civil rights or whatever. We're talking about overthrowing dictatorships, secessionist movements, anti-colonial, anti-occupation movements, the ones that are really going for broke. They found that armed struggle was successful 26% of the time, whereas a predominantly nonviolent struggle was successful 53% of the time. That is more than twice as likely to succeed. Mm-hmm. And things again, the ratio is not quite as large as it was, but it is still impressive. It is still clearly more effective than armed struggle. And I think part of the reason also is I think that the autocratic regimes that are left are more entrenched. I mean, I think institutionally, they are harder to challenge, and also they're getting more effective at challenging them. But just as when counterinsurgency warfare gets more effective, the guerrilla groups have to reconsider and use more innovative tactics, and similarly with nonviolent movements. I think also governments need to take this more seriously. That more people are accepting the idea of responsibility to protect, that is a military intervention to stop acute human rights abuses. Though we've seen how that often ends up making things worse and complicated, well-meaning in many cases, has its problems. But how about the right to support? The right to support nonviolent movements, in terms of providing, the funding, the computers, the other kinds of support. Now, I've traditionally been a little skeptical about this, especially when it comes to the United States, given the history of U.S. imperialism and our double standards on human rights, and the fact that the United States remains the world's #1 supporter of dictatorships and occupation armies around the world. And there's sometimes there's this fear that U.S. support could backfire, but at the same time, I think given the power of nonviolent action, and given that how it is far more successful and far less problematic than armed resistance, is something that the international community needs to consider, both at the governmental level, but also the non-governmental level in terms of international solidarity. Again, this is where global civil society can play a role, and this is where capacity building groups like the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict and others is a new group, which is that supports these kinds of nonviolent struggles.
Tell me about it. I never heard of it yet. The screen share, show me something about it.
I guess I'm trying to.
Great, because I really haven't heard of it, and I'm delighted to know there is such a thing. Where is it? It's mostly in DC, located in DC, Solidarity 2020 and beyond. They are doing some excellent work along these lines. There's Nonviolence International, War Resisters International, and the International Fellowship for Reconciliation also have programs of training and support for nonviolent activists around the world. But so it's important. We obviously these kind of groups, we never try to tell people what to do. We don't give them specific advice. But at least if we provide them with the understanding of the history, the theory, and dynamics of strategic nonviolent action, they can figure out how to apply it to their various situations. Do you have their website on your screen now? Because we could do a screen share. But who are the people involved with this outfit?
Catherine Hughes Freitag. She actually used to be based in Toronto. Steve Chase, but they do excellent work. All around the world.
Okay.
This is an example of the kinds of NGOs that are providing this kind of this kind of support. Because it's not to say that nonviolence works or violence works. It'll only, whatever methods of struggle you use, it'll only really work if you use if you're strategically smart. If you a logical sequence of tactics, if you analyze your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, look at your strengths and weaknesses, try to outmaneuver them. I mean, it's not just going out and having a protest,
Well,
especially in
I think
situations
that,
where you might be gunned down. There are hundreds and hundreds of tactics that can be utilized, and so you really, I mean, this is again, in the end, this is one reason why this field has expanded so much, is that people are realizing that we've had military academies all over the world. How many nonviolent struggle academies do we have? We going back to Lao Tzu and Machiavelli, we have all this stuff about war making, things like that. Where is the study of nonviolent struggle? And in the same kind of strategic thinking is important. I mean, and some of my best students in my seminars on nonviolent actions have been ROTC cadets, because they know how to think strategically.
Yes, right.
Yes. And this is really, I remember there was a time when, Che Guevara won too many Vietnams. There's this idea that, armed revolution is going to change the world. It will defeat capitalism, imperialism, and whatever. And similarly, similarly naive to say, oh, nonviolence is going to change, nonviolent action is going to change the world. It can only work if you are strategically smart.
That's
and that you have the tools, you have the training, you have the understanding. And this is the kind of thing that ICNC was offering. This is the kind of thing these other groups are offering. This is the kind of thing I think where that this explosive field in academia is offering.
One of I think the conclusions that Erica Chenoweth reaches about why there has been a little slippage is that there have been too many people who have believed that the only thing you really need to do is take to the streets. And if you can just use your cell phone and get people to meet at a certain monument or a square, that you've got it made. And of course, that's not the case.
Yeah, and the thing about Egypt, thing about Serbia, the thing about the many cases where we've seen hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the streets, and the dictator flees within a few days or whatever. Those are the result of years of organizing, years of grassroots mobilization, education, training. That was just a culmination of these long, drawn out struggles. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. These are protracted struggles, and just as a guerrilla army, can't have an assault on the capital initially and expect to win. They have to start at the village level, build their cadres, do hit and run tactics, kind of build up until they're at that point where they might actually have a military victory. Similarly with nonviolent action, you can't just get people out in the street. You have to do safer tactics, strikes, boycotts, maybe a few propaganda, the deed, of some small scale direct actions, but gradually build your movement until you're at a point where you could indeed have the numbers, and the power to bring down a dictator.
And the numbers really makes a difference. So I've focused a lot on Russia, and of course, with everybody else in the world now, I'm preoccupied with how to stop this carnage in Ukraine. And I just, I really think that it has to be Russians who are going to take the lead in doing that, and there's just not enough of them. They, by and large, are not well enough informed about what is going on, or even were not sufficiently informed about the nature of the leadership they had, or they didn't give a hoot anyway. I don't know which it is, but there's not the number that you need to make anything promising going on in Russia right now.
Not yet. But
yeah, but time is so important. In the meantime, while we're building a movement, there are all these people dying.
Yes, but that you say the same thing about guerrilla war. In fact, a lot more people tend to die in the guerrilla wars. That's the thing, is that again, unfortunately, people are going to die. People are going to be oppressed. That's the nature of all struggles. This idea, we tried nonviolence, it didn't work. We tried nonviolence, and they killed our peaceful demonstrators, so therefore you have to
But
take up
I
arms.
wanna-
Well, they're going to kill a lot more people when they take up arms. The thing is again, is that whether your struggle is violent or non-violent, there are going to be some losses. There are going to be some setbacks. Eventually, if you do have the support of the majority of the people and you can think strategically, and you can find the weaknesses in the regime and the system and figure out ways to
Yeah, but Stephen,
advantage of it.
I've lived in Toronto for maybe 50 years now. I've forgotten how long. And I have never seen any violence. I've never seen anybody hit anybody else or pull a gun or do a knife or anything. You don't have violence in a well-organized society because you have a rule of law. What we don't have internationally is a rule of law. And unless we have a rule of law, we're going to have people doing either violent or nonviolent resistance, but it's going to be, overt conflict. And we have to change the international system such that we have genuine international law that's enforceable and that people know what the rules are and that they must obey and enforce the law.
And having a broad-based, strategically smart, nonviolent action movement is the way to do it. I grew up in the South. I have vivid memories of a child of Jim Crow laws, where the U.S. Constitution was not recognized. There was no rule of law, or at least towards if you were black, but it was a movement that did end up ending the Jim Crow laws. And though obviously there's still plenty of institutionalized racism in the United States, there's been enormous progress as a result of the civil rights movement. And there is much more of a semblance of rule of law, again, not consistent enough, but far, far better, than it was 60 years ago.
You're teaching kids at the University of San Francisco to do that.
Exactly. And it helps it's a Jesuit institution, so there is a strong undercurrent of social justice. And polls show that this generation of young people is actually more woke, more aware, more prone to work for change and believe in change. And so I actually have a fair amount of hope for the future.
Perfect. All right. It's been fun. And it's great to get acquainted. So thank you very much, and good wishes to whatever you're doing, and continue it up. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, Stephen. Good to meet you. Bye. Project Save the World produces 2 of these shows each week. This is episode number 501. Watch or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. And to find a particular talk show, you should enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.